Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting, and we're working in these series of videos for the Chapter 3 exercises, the Group B problems that were assigned in the digital study guide. And as always, if you don't understand something, watch the videos again, watch the theory videos. And if you still don't understand, feel free to speak with an instructor. Right? So for problem 34 here, it says here, the accountant for Cyclone Construction posted adjusting entries A through E to the accounts at July 31st, 2014. Select balance sheet accounts and all the revenues and expenses of the entity follow in T account form. And remember, he's using the textbook uses the T accounts to represent the general ledger accounts. Because when you're using the form, if you were using the general ledger forms where you had a date, a description, a posting reference column, then a debit column, credit column, a balance with a debit column and a credit column, and you did that for each and every account, you'd be, you'd be using up a lot of space, all right? And you'd have to be flipping back and forth between things. So they're using the T accounts because the T account is a tool, all right? It represents the same exact thing. I can see the entries that have been posted, and I can calculate the balance in the account, all right? But it's in a lot more condensed format. It's the information that I only need to see, all right? So they're using the T accounts to represent the general ledger accounts throughout the book. When you're actually doing your work, get used to using the ledger accounts themselves, the forms. And of course, there are blank forms on the student community there, all right? So it says here, 1, explain the purpose of each adjusting entry. Then 2, calculate the ending balances and use the appropriate accounts to prepare an income statement for the year ended July 31st. And then 3, were the operations successful? Give the reason for your answer. All right, so this here we're going to kind of like work backwards, meaning instead of having the transaction and figuring out what our journal entry should be, they've already been posted to the ledger account. So by looking at the accounts, we're going to kind of like work backwards to figure out what it was for. And we're going to do that based upon the letters. So letter A here, we have a credit for $600 now in the supplies account. Now, immediately, if you've done problems 3-32 and 3-33, and the previous problems, you should already be familiar with, oh, well, I had a debit in my supplies account, and now I'm crediting it, so I'm reducing it. So what's the purpose of this entry? It's to record supplies that were used. And since this is a credit, I should have a debit to a supplies expense account, which I do, right? So that's the purpose behind letter A. I'm reducing my supplies, my supply inventory. All right, B, I see I have a credit to accumulated depreciation here. Well, since it's accumulated depreciation, what we're doing is we're recording our depreciation against for the equipment account. And of course, I can see the debit to the depreciation expense. So that entry is to record depreciation. All right, let's see C here. C has, again, a credit to accumulated depreciation. So I have a debit to depreciation. So I'm recording the depreciation against the building. Okay. Now, notice that, so B and C here are both depreciation entries. And in a previous video, I had said you don't make your entry as a debit to depreciation expense and a credit to accumulated depreciation. Right? You don't just use the words accumulated depreciation. You have to show what that accumulated depreciation expense is for. All right, what is the contra account for? In this case here, you see that they use the word equipment, so that determined the 1,800, and you see the word building. Okay, so that determined that it was the 6,000. So you have to, whenever you're using accumulated depreciation, you should be using the description for whatever that accumulated depreciation account was for. If you don't, you have no idea which one to put it into. Okay, so that's just a little aside there. right? So that was B and C, and also realize that you don't have a full set of accounts here, right? I mean, I told you you're not getting the full set of accounts because you don't see the equipment account here and you don't see the building account here, and we don't need to see those because our problem is asking us to create an income statement. Well, equipment and building are asset accounts. They don't show up on the income statement. Yes, we need the accumulated depreciation accounts because they affect our depreciation expense, which does show up on the income statement. Okay, so that's why you have those accounts there. All right, D, when I look over here, I have salary payable. Okay, and we know that's a liability and we're increasing it, so that means we owe our salaries for $1,700, and the offsetting side, the debit equaling the credit, is the salary expense. So that's $1,700 that we owe to our employees. And that's the adjusting entry for that. And then E here is for an accounts receivable. And why do we have an entry to accounts receivable? Because we made a sale on account. So the other half of the entry would be a credit to our service revenue in order to record the sale for $1,200. Okay. All right, so now the balances in the accounts. Let's see here. This 29,300 plus 1,200 is 30,500 on the debit side. For our supplies, debit of 3,000, credit of 600 means we have a debit of 2,400 for supplies. Accumulate depreciation, so that's 7,000. And this one here is 52,000. For salaries payable, the balance is 1,700. For service revenue, this is 39,200. For salary expense is 15,700. Supplies is 600, 1,800, and 6,000. So those are our balances. And now we create an income statement. All right, so for our income statement, again, as I do this, I'm going to be abbreviating, but follow correct formatting. All right. I mean, this is for my own usage, but if I were going to turn this in, I would actually write out Cyclone Construction Inc. Okay, I would write out income statement. I wouldn't abbreviate it. Year ended July 31st, 2014. So remember, this gets center aligned. The heading gets center aligned, and I have to make sure that the way I describe the date is correct. I have to show it for whatever period it is. Okay, in this case, it's for the year ended, and put the date that the year ends, because remember, the income statement is for a period of time. And so generally I put the heading first. Then the next thing I do is I write revenues and then expenses. Okay, because they show the categories of accounts, right? I'm going to have revenues less expenses. And remember, I may or may not be using multi-step, okay? Because I'm going to have more than one expense, that means I'm going to actually end up using two columns. Why? Because I'm going to put in all the expense amounts and then total them and put it in the right-hand column. So when I have my revenues less my expenses, I get my profit or loss in this column. Okay, so when I do the mathematical calculations, I move over one column. So just be aware of that. I'm working on a blank screen here, right? But my formatting is correct. I don't need to have lines on the paper, but I do have to have everything in the right format. So for revenues, I had a service revenue account. And since I only had one account, I only have to put the one amount, which was 39,200. Okay, and I put a $sign there because it's the first number in that particular column. Right? I don't have to put total revenues because it ends up being the same amount of 39,000. I mean, if I had written total revenue, okay, then what I would have done is I would have 39,200 here. I'd have one underlined, and I'd put the 39,200 here. all right, I wouldn't have this here, right? And it makes no sense for me to add just one number. So when you only have the one account, just put, you don't have to have a total, because you know that that is the total, total amount for uh, that particular category of accounts. Okay, so that's 39,200. Now, as I said before, for the expenses, they want us to list them from highest to lowest, and generally you do. But there is a little leeway in this, in that when you're creating your chart of accounts, and if for some reason you add an account, you're always trying to put the account in where it makes the most amount of sense. But then that obviously sometimes can skew. You don't just arbitrarily move things around. You kind of create your chart of accounts where you know that your highest expense is going to be at the top and your lowest is going to be at the bottom. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you should just always be mixing them all up. You should be listing them based upon your chart of accounts. Right? And of course, when you're writing your expenses, you write the whole name, salaries, and you write the word expense. Okay, you don't write just salaries and you assume it's under the expense column, so you don't have to write the word expense. No, write salaries and expense. All right, then the next one is depreciation, and this one here is being designated as building. Again, I'm abbreviating, right? And then I have depreciation equipment. Now, just as an aside, even though you can, when you have your, as I explained with our accumulated depreciation here, that we would name them equipment and building. When you're making the entry, you could have separate depreciation accounts, or you can have just one depreciation account and call the depreciation expense. Okay, so it would look like this if you put it to just the one account, depreciation expense. Right, so all of your depreciation expense would go into that expense account. I mean, that's the preferable way done, and the reason why you're doing that is because generally, if you wanted to know how much you depreciated for that particular asset, you would be looking on at the accumulated depreciation asset account. Okay, you wouldn't be looking at the expense account. So it is okay to use just one expense account and put both in this case here it was 6,000 and the 1,800 in the one account for a total of $7,800. Okay, but for this problem, they separate them out, right? And I think that has to do with just where you're at in your education. Okay, as you move on, you'll end up using just one depreciation account. So that's building and that's equipment. Then we had supplies expense. And so we have total expenses. All right, so as I had said, we're going to end up adding these amounts up, okay, in order to get a total expense. And notice I indented here, okay, the total expense. So salary expense, since it's the first number, we're going to put a $sign there, right? And that was 15,700. The depreciation was 6,000, 1,800, and the remaining amount was for supplies was 600. So we draw an underline to represent a mathematical calculation, and we put the balance in the right-hand column. So whenever you're doing a mathematical calculation, the balance goes in the next right-hand column. So this amount is 24,100 for the total expenses. Now obviously we want to take our revenues less our expenses, so we draw an underline which shows the mathematical calculation for this column, okay, and that gives us $15,100. Since it's the end of the calculation, we draw a double underline and we put the $sign there showing it's dollars and not decimals. And since it's a profit, we show the description as net income. Okay, so we have a profit of $15,100 on our income statement. And so for letter C here, I mean, that means we've just finished creating the income statement. And for number 3 here, it says, were the 2000 operations successful? Give the reason for your answer. Well, yes, it was successful because, obviously, we have a profit of 15,100 because our revenues were greater than all of our expenses. Right? So that's the that particular problem. And again, if you don't understand something, watch the video again, because this is the application of it. If you're not getting it, it's because you don't understand the concept. So go back and watch the concept videos, the theory videos that pertain to the different chapters. Working through the problems should just, you should be understanding why you're doing something, and if you're making a mathematical error or putting something in the wrong spot, you should be able to spot that from watching the videos. But if you're not understanding why you're doing something, that's a theory, an understanding error, not understanding the concepts, and you need to go back and review that material. And if you still don't get it, then yeah, feel free to telephone and speak with an instructor. Okay? All right, see you in the next video.